Okay, let's now move on to the supply side of the economy. So we have looked, remember I showed you a flow chart, a graph, in the very first class, which was meant to be a summary. And so we had ISLM model, then that together with the full employment line resulted in the aggregate demand, and then together with aggregate supply, we had the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. So we are now at the stage where we have gotten to the aggregate demand, and now we need the aggregate supply side. Okay? So we have two different perspectives, also from that flow chart I was telling you, that time-wise we can look at the economy in the short run, when our time horizon is more limited, or in the longer run. Okay, so depending on our time horizon, our supply curve will be different. In the short run, when studying the ISLM model, we assumed that the price level was fixed. Now, what will be the supply curve in line with that assumption? Consistent with that assumption, that the price level is fixed. How would you write an equation for a supply curve? So, by the way, the supply curve is in the same graph as the aggregate demand, which is the YP graph, right? So we have Y on the horizontal axis and P on the vertical axis. Now, on this graph, what is the equation that will produce a supply curve which is consistent with the assumption that prices are fixed?
P is equal to any constant.
Say again?
P is equal to any constant.
P is equal to a constant, say for example P bar. Okay? So that, and how would this kind of equation look like on the graph?
Horizontal line.
It will be, so if this is P bar, okay, what will it will be a horizontal line, right? This is P equal P bar equation. So that's what we call the short run aggregate supply. Okay? Now, if we extend our time horizon, we go to the long run, we remove the assumption that prices are fixed. Prices change. And if prices adjust to clear the markets, then that means that output is at full employment level, because the labor market will also be in equilibrium. Okay? So what is now the equation that describes the situation where output is at full employment level?
Y is equal to Y bar.
Y equal to Y bar. Okay, and how will that look like on the graph?
Vertical line.
That will be a vertical line at Y bar, right? So while this is the short run aggregate supply, this will be the long run aggregate supply. Okay, we will see later that the flat, short run supply, it's only a first approximation that we are using now. Later on, we will relax it and we will have an upward sloping supply line. But for now, let's stick with this one. Okay? So, put the two together, supply side and demand side together, and we have aggregate demand, we have short run aggregate supply, and we have long run aggregate supply. And then we have the point of general equilibrium, which is E. Is this point corresponding to the point we saw in the general equilibrium in the ISLM graph or not? Is there any difference between this and that? Could they be different or are they the same?
They should be the same.
They are the same, right? When we are at that point on the ISLM graph, that means we are here on this graph. The price level that ensures that the LM curve passes through exactly where the IS meet the full employment is exactly this price level. Okay. All right. So, if we are outside the general equilibrium, how will the adjustment take place? That's described in this table. So, if we are with output which is higher than the full employment, what happens over time to the price level? It will
Rise.
go up, right? If output is above full employment, price level will rise. Why is that?
So because to balance out, instead of producing more, the producers will increase the price so that they don't have to produce more and get.
Yeah. There is more, the aggregate demand is greater than what firms would like to produce, than the full employment level of output. So there is pressure on prices to go up, which is the case every time demand exceeds supply. Okay, so if output is below full employment, what will happen to the price level?
Or
It will fall. Okay? And if it's equal, then it will remain constant. So remember this table, because this table will guide you in understanding the adjustment back to the general equilibrium when you are out of it. Okay, so now let's look first at an IS shock. Okay, so we have this. This is coming from Mankiw. Okay, now in Mankiw, this long run aggregate supply is basically what Abel Bernanke calls the full employment line. Okay, that's the full employment line. And that corresponds to our long run aggregate supply curve here. Okay? Now, suppose we are here with our also short run aggregate supply, given price P1, and that price means that the LM curve will pass through exactly that point. So we are in general equilibrium. Now there is a shock to the IS curve. Okay? So a negative shock. Okay, that means the IS curve shifts left. That means also, as we saw, that aggregate demand shifts also left, right? Whenever there is an exogenous shock to the IS curve, that also determines a shift to the AD curve. Okay? So now, notice we are here. Output is below full employment. So what will happen to the price level?
price level will increase.
If we are below, price level will fall, right? Price level will fall. So how will that manifest itself in these two graphs?
The LM will shift to the right.
The LM will shift to the right because the decrease in the price level is increasing money supply, real money supply, and this line will start shifting down as well. Okay, because the price level is now changing. So that line shifts down. This continues the shift all the way until we reach equilibrium. at the new point where the new IS line now meets the vertical full employment line and the vertical aggregate supply. Okay? So the adjustment back to general equilibrium always happens through shifts in the LM curve, shifts and changes in the price level. Okay? In the long run. Okay. Is this clear? This is the result of a negative exogenous shock to the IS curve. So in the goods market. Now, what about if the shock is to the LM curve? So there is a shock to money demand. Okay, suppose there is a, want to consider a negative or positive shock? Increase or decrease in money demand?
Increase.
Or money supply in this case. In increase, let's consider an increase. Okay? Increase in M from M1 to M2 greater than M1. So what happens?
LM shifts to the right.
LM shifts to the right. Okay? And so, once LM shifts to the right, our new short run equilibrium is
Greater than Y.
greater than Y. Here, what happens when we have the increase in M1, from M1 to M2?
Aggregate demand shift to the right.
This will also shift to the right. Aggregate demand will also shift to the right, right? So, somewhere here, same as here, will go here. So in both graphs, we will have Y greater than Y bar. So then what happens?
Price.
When Y is greater than Y bar, you see, you really have to learn the table when. When Y is equal to Y bar, that means that there is more demand than firms would like to have. We are above full employment. So prices will increase. Prices will go up. Which means, what happens to this line? So basically we are here. Okay. Then we shift here, and we are here. Okay. Then prices start increasing. So this line moves up, right? And on the other graph, what happens to the LM curve?
LM shifts to the left.
It starts shifting back, right? So the shift will continue. And when will it stop?
When it's in equilibrium.
Once we reach the new
Y bar.
aggregate demand. So again we reach back to Y bar. And the same is true there. It will stop once the LM curve is fully back to the original position. Okay? So that's how the adjustment takes place with respect to changes in money supply, exogenous changes in money supply. Now, so notice that here Y is back to general equilibrium, so did not change, and P has gone up. Okay, the effect on these two variables is that Y goes remains the same in long run, but P goes up. Okay, this is important for what we are going to see next. But that is the so-called money neutrality. Okay? So before, what we saw here, so if this was instead a shift in the IS curve, we saw a negative shift, right? But if we were looking at a positive shift, or even a negative shift we can talk about, what is the end result? So you see, with money, there is no real effect on the economy. The only effect is on prices. Output is back to full employment. Now, with respect to IS shock, output is also back to full employment. And the price level is lower in case of a negative shock. If it was a positive shock, price level would be higher, but output would again be back to full employment. So what is the difference between this and the shock to the money supply? Are there real effects here or not? He says no. Do you agree, all of you? Anybody who disagrees? Are you clear about what is the question I'm asking? Are you clear about the question? No?
Repeat the question.
Okay. So the question is, if we have an IS shock, does that have an effect on the real economy? A real effect? Or is there only, when all is said and done, there is only a change in prices, and that's all? He says there is no real effect on the economy. It's the same as with money. There is no real effect. I'm asking if all of you agree with him or not. You agree?
Yeah, because output will be the same. Only
Output will be the same. So you all agree?
The long run it shouldn't.
You all agree? You agree? You understand the question?
I'm not sure.
If, say, government expenditure decreases, so there is an IS shock, then in the long run, I showed here that we go back to full employment level of output. So output is the same as we started, but prices will change. So is there any, and the same happens when we consider a change in demand, in money supply. Output will go back, but price level will change. In that case, we say there is no effect on the real side of the economy because output is still there, no change. Here, is there any change to the real side of the economy? He says no. And most of your friends agree with you. Do you agree or not?
Yes, sir. I agree.
You agree? Do you agree?
Sir, does it have something to do with the quotient with which the curve is?
So let me give you a hint. In case of the change in money supply, here, is there any change in the interest rate? We call this the real interest rate for a reason. So once the LM curve shifts, then it goes back. Not only output is back, but also interest rate is back. So is there any change to the real interest rate? No. So there is no change to the real side of the economy. Let's look back here.
So I change my answer.
There is a change in the real interest rate, which means there must have been a change also in, if interest rate, like in this case, is lower, there must be a change in investment. So it's not true that there is no real effect. There is a real impact. Inside output, output may still be the same, but the different components are now changed. For example, if the original shift in IS was due to a change in G, there will be an opposite change in I. So there is a real effect. That's why I kept asking and kept again and again. Even though it's not immediately clear, but in case of this, in this case, there is a change on the real side of the economy. With respect to a shock to the LM curve, then there is no, in the long run, there is no effect on the real side of the economy. So now that we have said all this, it should be very easy to understand money neutrality, monetary neutrality, okay, in the long run. Okay. So how does that work? Precisely in the same way. We start from a given price level. So we have a given aggregate demand. We are on this short run aggregate supply because that's the price level. And we are at full employment. Okay? Then we have an increase in money supply by say 10%. This increase in money supply, now when my voice goes like that, that is a sign that I've shouted too much for too long. So an increase in money supply will shift the AD curve to the right. Okay? So we are now here, above full employment. So what happens next?
Then there is price.
This line will start moving up in this graph until we go back to,
Y bar.
so from E we move to F, and then from F we move back to H. Okay, now at H, prices will also have increased by 10%, the same as money supply. So are these numbers equal by coincidence? No, because how do we know? You know, the LM curve shifted to the right due to the increase in money supply, and then it shifts all the way back, which means after the two shifts,
Is back at general equilibrium.
there is no change in real money supply. So that means that there was an increase in nominal money supply by 10%. So if at the end of the day there is no change in real money supply, that means the price level must also have changed by the same amount. So that is why it is also increased by 10% in this example. Okay? So, and again, you cannot see it here, but there is no change in interest rate. You have to use the other graph to see it. So then, you can see that we are back at the same level of output, and there is no change also in the various components of output. Investment has not changed, government expenditure, consumption, because there is no reason to change them once things go back. So there is no real effect on the economy. So in this sense, we say that money is neutral in the sense that in the long run, which means that it doesn't leave any impact, real impact on the economy. Now this is depending whether money is neutral or not, depends on the speed of adjustment of prices. If you know, we said in the short run, AD curve shifts, we go from E to F, and then in due time, we move back to H. Now imagine that the speed of adjustment is very fast. So you kind of fast forward this film, like, then there is no effect at all on the economy from an increase in money supply. The only effect you will observe in that case, it's an increase in prices. But if the speed of adjustment is low, then if it takes time, if you go like slow, then while you are going here, you see the increase in output. And so you see an effect on the economy. So then monetary policy becomes meaningful It can stimulate the economy. So measuring the speed of adjustment of prices is crucial, it's very important, to understand the effectiveness of monetary policy to stimulate the economy. Okay. The final bit is about, again, the algebra. You know, we are all a bit tired, but this is important and it should be easy after the algebra we did before. So this is now to derive the equation behind the AD curve. Okay, we want to derive the equation behind the AD curve. So we have seen that the AD curve comes from varying the price level and observing shifts in the LM curve and how that will change the equilibrium output as the price level changes. Okay? So what we need to do is to take the ISLM model. Okay, so this is the IS curve, this is the LM curve. Okay? And then we get rid of R, because in the graph we do not have R anymore. How do we get rid of R here?
Equate the two equations.
Equate the right-hand sides of the two equations. Okay? In that case, we'll have an equation between Y and P, which is exactly our AD curve. Okay? You can see that if you equate these two right-hand sides and then you solve for Y, you get this. Okay, it's just a bit of algebra. I didn't show it openly, but after what we did before, it should be easy to do. Okay, so that's the equation for the AD curve. Okay, now here in this AD curve, this is the numerator, right? This is, so this part is the numerator. This numerator is just the vertical intercept of the IS curve minus the vertical intercept of the LM curve. So that tells you that any change in the vertical intercept of either curve will also shift the AD curve. Right? You can see, for example, that a change in money supply will shift the AD curve as well, just like it did with the LM curve. Okay. Next, we want to derive the supply curves already done here. Okay, P equal P bar and Y equal Y bar. This is the short run and this is the long run. Okay. Then we have to put things together. So first, to find, we write the AD curve and replace P with P bar so that we pin down
The price.
No, the price, we pin down
The output.
output. We are here. You always have to have clear in your mind the correspondence between the equations and the graphs. So with this equation, forget the P bar for a moment. Without the P bar, if just you keep the general P, this equation gives you this line. Okay? Gives you that line. Now once you put P bar in there, P bar, you pin down your Y that corresponds to P bar. You see? Otherwise your Y is not determined, because as you change P, then you have a different one for each P. But once you have that P bar, then you have a particular Y. Okay? And the same you do with respect to the long run by instead plugging, instead of Y, you put Y bar. That's the long run supply. Okay? And then you have the long run equilibrium. P as a function of, so in that case, now you are here. Okay, so if you have your AD, once you plug Y bar in your AD, you pin down particular P for that Y bar. You see, it's in terms of P for that Y bar. Okay? And incidentally, this is the same equation as the one which we found before the general equilibrium. It's reported here, but you can go back and in the slides and see that general equilibrium equation. It was the same, the one that we found to get the LM curve that passes through this very point. When we found the P that gives us the LM curve that passes through here, that equation is the same as that equation. Okay, so the next slide is the Black Sea at night, so which means it's over. Actually, it's black on the screen, it's more like white here. You know, there is also a white sea, not just a black sea. You know, in Turkey, they call the Mediterranean Sea, they call it White Sea.
There's also a Red Sea.
Red Sea as well, yes. But all of them are blue. Yes.
And it will not be in class.
What do you mean?
The quiz will be like in the evening.
No. It will be during class time.
Okay.
Why should it be in the evening? Don't get me into nightmares with the arrow or anything. It will be in class here.
Will it be announced?
And I am announcing it.
When
Yes.
is it?
Next week.
Tuesday or Thursday?
No, it could be either Tuesday or Thursday. I will announce it once I understand the availability of teaching assistant with Vigilate.
Oh, but there's a
So
holiday
it's-
on Tuesday.
Sorry?
There's a holiday on Tuesday.
Really? Oh, Tuesday there is no class? Then it's on Thursday. Solved. Done.
So can you upload all the slides which we are going to do in the future? So because in the class it's difficult for me to understand the slides
Yeah,
in the
but
class.
I
So
don't, I mean, I'm making them, changing them, so if I upload them, then you have wrong slides if I make some changes. Then you don't have the recent version, that's not good.
so it doesn't matter because I'll just go through then and look at the book because I'm thinking of going through the lecture before. The lecture.
Yeah, I will try to upload before, a bit before, not too close to the lecture,
Okay.
but I can't upload from now the whole course, because I want to retain the freedom to change things. And if I upload the whole thing, then you have stuff that may change. So you may have the wrong stuff then, you see?
So, but still, is it possible if you can send me the old one, so I can just grasp?
No, as I'm telling you, I will upload
Yeah.
a bit earlier
Okay.
so that you have more time before class
Okay.
to take a look.
Okay.
That's what I can do.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.